Good morning, everybody. My name's Tony Wilson. I'm an independent security consultant based in Cumbria, just up the road. What I'm going to be talking about today is the fact that it's an obvious statement. We can only defend what we know we have. Turn that on its head, and we have, if you don't know you have it, it's probably vulnerable. And fair enough, it's an obvious statement again. But when it's the physical, such as a USB drive, a USB key or something like that, and we maybe have 10 in our homes, 20 in our businesses, do we know where they're all at? Do we know what's on them? Maybe not. Now, that's the physical things that we're losing and don't know we have. What about components within devices we have bought? And with the Internet of Things, we'll be getting lots of devices with the Linux operating system on, for example. When my mother plugs the fridge into the internet, does she know she's got Linux running in her home? That's something that needs defended and patched regularly. So we'll be exploring that in the next 10 minutes. Asset management has changed throughout the last 20 years where I've been in the business. Doing an asset register used to be the physical, okay? What had value to the business, and it had a financial value, and it would go to the accounts department, so if it was stolen, we'd know how much it'd be written off by or how much it'd be to be replaced. Now, and as Tony Dinehouse mentioned earlier, we think of these things more of having more properties, these assets. Information is an asset, and it has attributes, it has confidentiality attached to it, integrity and availability attached to it. And we need to feed these things into some form of risk assessment so we know what would be the impact of a breach of any of those three things. Personal information has also changed throughout the 20 years. When I first started, it would have been, we'll protect your username, we'll protect your name, address, bank details, pretty much that sort of thing that we thought was personal information. But that's changed. People are walking around the streets, they're plugged into their iPhones, not just with headsets. They've got pulse meters on. They're plugged in, they've programmed what they've eaten that morning, so they know how far they've walked, how many calories they've burnt, what their heart rate is, how healthy they are. That is all stored on a device that is easily stolen or hacked into once the attackers know what the vulnerabilities are. And I'll be showing you the types of places that these hackers go to find out where the vulnerable things are. We have the move to open and modular coding. If anybody thinks that their web designer or their software developer has written everything from scratch themselves, they're sadly mistaken. They're using things from all around the world. There will be some that maybe write from scratch, but they will certainly be using modules that we need to know, was the correct risk assessment given when they used it, or was it a cut and paste off the internet just to get that calendar app working, for example. So the due diligence, we'll be exploring that in this talk. And to drive that, the role of the auditor, this is a role I do, to drive that, to use the auditor's finger and just ask people who are developing these things, do you know where that was sourced from? Do you know the impact should that be breached? What impact would that have on other components in your device and to the consumer? And ultimately, we'll need to create accurate inventories, and I'll be showing you some cautionary tales. So we spoke about open development. It's good, it's rapid, they don't reinvent the wheel, it keeps costs down. Often proven technology, but often it's unproven, okay? It's been sourced in a hurry to meet a deadline, to get a product out. As consumers, we need to understand that. That does happen. We need to know there are inherent risks in everything we buy. So the auditor comes along, and if a business is undergoing a security regime, such as ISO 27001, the auditor plays a part in asking you say you're doing this, you're saying you're keeping accurate inventories. Can I have evidence that you're actually doing that? And that's from a business point of view, so a small business can have an auditor check out that they're doing things that they think they're doing, but also the developers. So I'm addressing both parts of the people in the room, the developers and the small businesses. And check risk assessments are made do you know what the threats and the vulnerabilities are to these components? And what are the likelihoods of a threat exploiting a vulnerability? Well, it's conferences like this where you start to understand there are more threats than we first thought. And in the next 5 or so minutes, you'll see that it's so much easier for hackers the increase in probability is higher because hackers can find our things online, especially with the Internet of Things. And also the incident response plan, should something happen and you're a developer, how do you let your people know that have bought your product to upgrade? If you're a consumer, how do you know that you need to upgrade? How long has something been lying vulnerable in your office? So we have some cautionary tales. I broke my teeth on Matt's script archive. Anyone who learned Perl 15, 20 years ago, Matt's script archive was a lifeline, okay? Somebody wanted a form mail, something like that. Yeah, cut and paste off Matt's script archive, brilliant. Moving on, WordPress, for example, has other modules. We were just using modules from here, there, and everywhere to put together a great website. But once a vulnerability is found in any of those, it will find itself up on a website such as securityfocus.com. And it will give you proof of concept and ways of breaking these things, and just methods of doing it. And you can Google for certain URLs to find a script, to find a component, and use the paint by numbers that you'll find on YouTube to actually hack and break into those things. So that's very much a software-driven thing. Now, what would happen if we were able to, on the Internet of Things, find out what components out there are vulnerable? I don't mean just, I want to attack that business, let's see what they've got. Just, you go onto YouTube, you find a very interesting way of hacking into a baby monitor with a camera or something, or for fun, someone's fridge, or whatever it is nowadays. What would happen if there was such a database of every IP, every product that has an IP address that's publicly accessible? Well, enter Shodan. Shodan is such a thing. The IP version 4 address space has been scanned, and probing packets have been sent out to each, and all of our components are diligently replying saying, yes, I'm an Apache 3.2, or yes, I've got this, I've got whatever version number it is. So now we actually can just type in, and as you can see on here, they have big claims. Power plants, iPhones, wind turbines, down to fridges. So that's the type of thing. The version numbers of all these things are in there, complete with an IP address. And you can even go to the region you're in, if you wanted, to localize it right down to places in your area. So once you know how to exploit something, here's a way of finding it. So this highlights the need for user registration. Now, by this I mean product registration. If something is vulnerable, we need to be told about it. We don't want to be finding out months after the event that something in our office has been vulnerable. We want the manufacturers, so stressing to the manufacturers, to get people to register such products. So when something has been found, a vulnerability has been found, we can take action on it. At the bottom, the things I've got here, the changing defaults and understanding firewalls, this is because there is a worm traveling around the Internet of Things, traveling around any computer with Linux on it, quite frankly. And what it's doing is it's using well-known default passwords to replicate itself around, collect information as it's going. And as users, we need to now understand firewalls, because the very helpful thing that Symantec released was to say, oh yes, it's easily solved, upgrade it, but also could you please check that inbound HTTP doesn't go to that device. Well, again, using the example of my mother plugging in an Internet of Things fridge, she's not going to understand what that means at all. So we do need to become a bit more savvy on things like that. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the old Huawei instances of the suspicion that Chinese manufacturers are putting things into our devices with trapdoors. But we do know that D-Link did have a backdoor in it. It was by accident. But again, this was plugged in October. How many of us in this room know that if we had a Soho broadband router, that we needed to plug that? So really, that's what I want to get across to you guys today. Is it might be a very obvious statement. We can only protect what we know we have. But I come from the angle that we don't actually know what we have. Okay, so just very quickly, where do we start to make an inventory? Well, as Tony said in the introduction, in the planning phases. When we're planning a security regime, we must build in accurate inventories. So consumers will ask more questions. Supply networks will start asking more questions of each other. Where will that component go in I'm putting in my device? A vulnerability will exist in something you own or build. And the bad guys will probably know about it before you do. And your company's reputation is at risk. So my advice to you is understand what you have, understand how it needs defended, and patch accordingly. Thank you very much.